All those tall skyscrapers in New York City that you see, with Rockefeller, 3 Rockefeller Center being one of those, which is 79 stories tall, they're built on the land that these people that go back 4 centuries owned. The Schuylers, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Stuyvesants, the Rensselaers, the Tenbrooks, and it goes on and on and on and on. And that's why when I talk about these Alexander Hamilton, how he ties so substantially to the Kennedy assassination, his roots, his family genealogy. So anyways, I'll give you the background here. But MKUltra experiments were done here. Now, you got to understand, they did these gruesome experiments on patients who were unwittingly aware of this. And these people went in there looking for help to end their psychological pain, and they were used by the Rockefellers as unwitting, as guinea pigs for their experiments. You know, there was a time back in the 50s, see, when the Rockefeller controlled big pharma monopoly, oligarchy was producing psychedelic drugs and promoting their use through doctors, through patients, advocating their use to patients, knowingly advocating their use. But this, the patients didn't know. See, a lot of these drugs and things are developed by big pharma. Then anything that the Rockefellers develop, they're always going to use it to kill people. That's their nasty nature. So they took these drugs, we can use these to produce Manchurian candidates. And if you understand something, this is what I call MKUltra. It means it's ultra secret, because the Manchurian candidates' weapons are basically programmed to go after whoever their potential targets and destroy these targets. And there's no way that they can ever trace back who gave the order. They cannot trace back to the Rockefellers. That's why they call ultra, because it's ultra secret. That's why we don't know the dimensions of this huge program. Oswald Avas was part of it. They were doing. See, once they do these experiments in here, and this is a laboratory of human suffering, they're going to take those experiments. They're going to take what they learned. They're going to take that technology. They're going to move it out to the streets. They're going to deploy it for action. The Rockefellers are not going to get involved in all this just for experiments. Now, another direct connection to this building and the Rockefellers, this one was obvious, was in the public spotlight. Nelson Rockefeller, I should say Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, he headed up known as the Rockefeller Commission. Not much different than Warren Commission. Warren Commission was all Rockefeller 501c3 foundation managers. So this time Rockefeller went in on his own. And one of the people on it was supposedly called Blue Ribbon panel. That means they're just lawyers and friends of the Rockefellers and boardroom pals of the Rockefellers and their foundation. But one of the people on the panel was Ronald Reagan. That's a huge, massive history. Because you know something, if you know anything about Bobby Kennedy, who's the first person Bobby Kennedy went after as Attorney General of the United States? You know who it was? It wasn't Jimmy Hoffa. It wasn't the Mafia. It was Ronald Reagan. He went after him in his connection with the Actors Screen Guild Union. And he went after a company called MCA Corporation, Music Corporation of America, which does have gangster roots going back to Chicago. Started by a man named Jules Stein, who booked entertainment acts for the 10,000 speakeasies in the city of Chicago, same places that Al Capone was bringing in bootleg whiskey. Actually, Capone was more involved in the enforcers. They were the muscles and enforcers that protected these speakeasies, because if a speakeasy got robbed or a truck of booze got hijacked, they can't go to the police, so they have to have their own enforcement. That really was Al Capone's role. The money actually was all handled by the Jewish gangsters, like Guzek, they call him Greasy Finger, Jake Guzek, and Henry Crown. Very significant name, Henry Crown, considered the boss of the Chicago outfit. And he's also what? Part owner of Rockefeller Center. See, it always goes back to the Rockefellers. He was also most significant stockholder in General Dynamics, another weapon system, which in 1963 was headquartered where? Rockefeller Center, right next to the Eastern Airline building. And Eastern Airline connects to who? David Ferrie, who was indicted for killing. 3 people were indicted for killing Kennedy. Hazel, obviously. David Ferrie, a wannabe priest, was a flyer he worked as an airline pilot for the Rockefellers. Rockefellers around Eastern Airline out of 10 Rockefeller Plaza. And also Clay Shaw, who also worked at the Vanderbilt Theater, but at the time, back in the 30s, was owned by the Rockefellers. It's owned by Rockefeller Development Group today. And then, of course, the theater's long gone. Clay Shaw worked there, and the theater the Rockefellers were using the theater to make radio broadcast programs for radio back in that day. Radio broadcasts out of NBC, which is 30 Rockefeller Plaza. As I said, 3 men were indicted for the JFK assassination. 2, Hazel was assassinated by Jack Ruby. Why? Because Ruby was involved in the assassination of Chicago gangster James Reagan, who was running the horse wire, and also connected with the murder of Leon Cook. Actually, James Reagan identified his killers. He didn't die right away. He was in a hospital for 3 or 4 days. He died in the hospital 3 or 4 days later of mercury poisoning. But they opened fire with machine guns. So he identified his killers. One was David Yares, who was one of Jack Ruby's best gangster pals. Another guy, too, was, I don't know if I can remember his name. Blaney Patrick? Yeah. One of those guys was eventually found brutally destroyed in the back of their car. I can't remember all the detail now, but you could Google a lot of that stuff. They're Jack Ruby's Chicago hoodlum pals. So the problem was, Bobby Kennedy was in the process of opening the case of the murder of James Reagan. James Reagan was a federal appointee. He was appointed by President Roosevelt. They were starting to regulate. He had ran an operation called the Race Wire, where they reported race results, horse racing results, to a lot of places where they were actually gambling. The gambling was illegal. Reporting it wasn't so bad. It was part of a syndicate. And it was allegedly believed, that Henry Crown, one of the Annenbergs, and people connected with the Hilton Hotel, ordered the murder of James Reagan, and David Yares, Jack Ruby, was the one of the trigger killing. Also the murder of Leon Cook, who was the radical union leader, that murder has been connected to Jack Ruby, and also to the family there. Mo Allen. I'm sorry, I can't think of the name now. They're connected with the Teamsters. I'm sorry, I can't think of that name now. I know what the name is. Red Dorfman, the Dorfman family. They handled the insurance business for the Teamsters and other things. Now I'll talk a little bit about the murder of Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was murdered in the Ambassador Hotel by a Manchurian candidate named Sirhan Sirhan. Now here's the thing. Then again, we got to go back to New York City and the old dynasties, the lords and patrons of the Hudson River Valley. Where we're going to go, it's going to go back to Alexander Hamilton again. It's going to go back to the Army-McCarthy hearings. You see, the Republicans, and during that time with Joe McCarthy, what the Republicans were doing, including Richard Nixon, they were defending the gangsters. They were gangster friendly. Why? Because the gangsters were the muscle that the Rockefellers were using as their front line against organized labor. Basically, they were using these gangsters to break the back of unions. And there was tremendous violence perpetrated against union members, union leaders, and union rank and file. Well, it's well documented in countless history books. Bobby Kennedy, in his book, The Enemy Within, he talked about Albert Anastasia. Actually, that book was published in 1960. Actually, Albert Anastasia was assassinated in 1957, which was it was right around the corner. It was, maybe 3 blocks away from the Time Life building in Rockefeller Center. See, it was believed that the Rockefellers were using gangsters to police the construction site when they were building Rockefeller Center. One particular notorious gangster was a man named Joe Adonis. He was walking the construction sites when they put up 30 Rockefeller and other buildings. Time Life was built in 57, right? Same year Albert Anastasia was murdered. They were all part of a group called Murder Incorporated, which were running out of the Waldorf Astoria. Then again, you're going back to the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the elites that owned hotels and properties and office buildings in New York City. But here's the thing, going back to the McCarthy hearing, one of the lead players in the Army McCarthy hearings was a man named Robert Tenbrook Stevens. See, Tenbrook, his ancestor, General Abraham Tenbrook, commanded 9 Rockefeller family members. He was the battlefield commander at the victorious Battle of Saratoga for the American troops. And there was 9 Rockefeller family members who participated in that. But that's not so intricate to why the Rockefellers killed Kennedys. Although they are truly sons of the American Revolution. And in the back of their minds, that would in their back of their minds be a motive. But the motive was the Rockefellers were using these gangsters. They had set up a whole army, including most notably these private detective agencies, like the Felts, like the Dodge, Ball and Felts detective agencies. They murdered 200 people in Colorado under the orders of Rockefeller. And there was the Ludlow episode where the Rockefellers opened up with their machine gun fire, and the Rockefellers had turned themselves into terrorists. This is, if you strikers, you want to keep calm and keep fighting us, we're going to kill your family. The Rockefellers turned themselves into terrorists, and they opened up the amount of machine guns and armored cars. They opened up on 10 cities, killing babies and mothers. These are not nice people, folks. Don't ever think they're nice people. Don't ever call them philanthropists. They're nothing but that. They are not philanthropists. They give nothing away. They steal. They're plunderers and murderers. They parade themselves as philanthropists. Well, getting back to the Army McCarthy hearing, this lead character in the story was a man named Abraham Tenbrook Stevens. All right? He was what? He was Secretary of the Army. Okay? Well, they were investigating. I think this goes back to the Kefauver Committee, but Bobby talked about it in his book. They were investigating the manufacturing of uniforms and gangster involvement in the manufacturing uniforms, and mentioning the name of Albert Anastasia. Then again, whose partner in crime was Joe Adonis, who was the labor forcer for the building of Rockefeller Center. So if anybody starts talking about asking for more money or going on strike or work stoppages, they get dealt with. Nobody's going to stand up to these guys. These guys were famously violent. They would murder someone and they would announce it to the world what they did, because they were never going to be held accountable. Because why? Because they were employed by the elite Protestants to defend the unions, and also other services. But we could get into that some other time.